Hello, my name is Julie and today I'm going to be talking about the 12 books that I read in September. Every single month I start this off with, my reading month was weird. This month was actually weird because I'm actually kind of only going to be telling you about 10 books because 2 of the books that I read this month were rereads, which is wild. I usually only reread 1 book a year, maybe, and this month I actually reread 2. That wasn't originally the plan, but I decided that I wanted to make a video that required me to reread one of these books, and I needed to do it now to be in timely fashion. So look forward to content in October because I have some stuff I'm absolutely so excited about. But hopefully that means this is going to be a shorter wrap up, so let's get to my stats so we can talk about the books. And if you see my stats being inconsistent with how many are included, there's some stats that I do count with my rereads and some stats that I don't. So in September, I read 12 books for a total of 4,767 pages. My average rating was a 3.73 across the books that were new to me, and I believe I'm going to be giving 5-star to 1 of those 10 books. The average page count of these books was 397, and I read on average 158 pages a day. I read 5 books from my own TBR. I added 1 book to my TBR, and in an unprecedented move, I unhauled 5 books from my TBR. So my annual net TBR is negative 21 books. I could not be more pleased with that. For star ratings, we have a nice bell curve. 1 book that I gave in the 2 range, a good amount of 3s, lots of 4s, and 1 5. And looking at those pie charts, I read a lot of fantasy this month, followed by mystery, thriller, horror, and 1 of science fiction, historical fiction, classics, and nonfiction. I read 2 books that were straight sequels. I read 1 book that's like, is it a companion? Is it a prequel? Is it a conclusion? Who knows? I read 7 books physically, I read 1 ebook, and I read 4 audiobooks. 3 of the books that I read from this month were from authors that were entirely new to me. 5 were from authors that I had read before this year. 2 of them were repeats of authors that I tried for the first time this year, and 2 of them, as I said before, were rereads. So let's get into the books. The first book that I read this month was Hot Wax by ML Rio. I was very graciously given an e-arc of this by the publisher, Simon & Schuster, so thank you so much to them and NetGalley for giving me one. I read this in my most recent video where I tried to read as many new releases and arcs as I could in 24 hours. This is about our main character, Suzanne. Her father was in, I want to say like a punk-ish band called Gil and the Kills. There was a summer when she was younger, just as the band was taking off, that she actually came on tour with them when she was a child. During that tour, something happened that meant the band never played again, and Suzanne kind of blames herself. So we are operating in side A, where we are following the summer that tour happens. Side B, where we have Suzanne as an adult. Her father has just died. She has his old car and she's trying to fix it, and she's meeting some new people, kind of having a midlife crisis. She's also into photography, so there are Polaroid chapters that are different snippets from her life and her dad's life. And then there's also extra chapters that are from her ex-husband, because when her father died, Suzanne left him extremely suddenly, and now he is going on a rampage trying to find her. I loved If We Were Villains, and I am one of the few people who actually really enjoyed whatever the novella was from last year. I think that I like books that are about music and bands and stuff like that, and I thought that it would be interesting to see this sort of life, but from the perspective of a person who is not in the band, because usually when you are doing these types of books, it's like interviews with the band. And it turns out that made the music uninteresting. We don't get to see really the stories behind why the music is the way that it is, what are the stories behind the lyrics, but I just don't think that it's really interesting for me to see like multiple shows of this band when I don't have any connection to the music. She's just kind of observing. Other people are trying to shelter her from it, somewhat successfully or not, and Suzanne herself is a pretty uninteresting character in my opinion. I think the point of her is that she doesn't really know where she's going, but I never thought that we got any sort of conclusion. And like, I don't think that there was anything particularly wrong with her or this perspective. It just was not really interesting to me. And then I really underestimated from the synopsis how much of this was going to be about the ex-husband. The way that he is talking about women, like, it is very purposeful that this is a character who believes he's the nice guy and sees himself as the victim, even though he's doing all of these things. While on paper, I think that was interesting, it was an exhausting perspective that I didn't feel like reading from, and I actually think it took away from any sort of story we could have had about Suzanne. Like, that perspective is the reason this book is shelved as a thriller when the other parts, it's just general fiction, in my opinion. I don't think Suzanne really had an arc here, and that would be the push to read this book. I think that there are going to be a couple people who are really going to like how this is talking about music. I think there are some people who are going to connect to Suzanne, but I found that very difficult to do. This was a flat 3-star for me. There was no absolute sin that this book committed, but it was just that not one part stood out, except for maybe that ML Rio has a really good vocabulary. Then I listened to Watermoon by Samantha Sotoyumbao. This is a 2025 release fantasy book that was very hyped. It was the first big fantasy release of this year. When it came out, I was like, oh, that looks so good. And I kind of came to the conclusion that it probably was not really for me. And the only reason that I read this book is because I believe it is a shoo-in to be nominated for the Goodreads Choice Awards for Fantasy, and it happened to be available from my library. Guess what? I was right. This is a cozy fantasy that is inspired by Studio Ghibli. Our main character, her father, runs a pawn shop for regrets. It is hidden in like a ramen restaurant, and if you go into the restaurant and you have like some big thing in your life that's a regret, you will open the door, and instead of getting the ramen restaurant, you'll get this pawn shop. That pawn shop actually exists in another world, so it's technically this portal before you get to this other world. Our main character's father has retired. It is her very first day of running the pawn shop, and her father seems to have fully disappeared, like run away. And at the exact same time that she finds this out, this young man comes in, and they are immediately smitten with each other. And the two of them are going to have to go on this adventure throughout this world that's literally called Isekai. Is that supposed to be like tongue-in-cheek obvious, or was it supposed to go over my head that you called the world Isekai? Because that felt cheesy to me. But this book is full of cheese. This is the type of world where like, oh, if you hum a song, then like you can be transported on these giant paper airplanes or something like that. All of the magic is like manifestations of like real things. For example, your regrets. I think if you're the type of person who really likes Matt Haig, this is the type of fantasy book for you. I think that this book is kind of style over substance. I do like that this is kind of talking about generational trauma on top of like living with your regrets is an important part of growing as a person. But those things are so blatantly obvious, like at the front. Like the magic of this world feels like something you would get out of a middle grade book, like kind of Phantom Tollbooth-y. And to me as an adult, I want something that has more of a plot going for it and give me the themes within the plot. I don't know that it actually felt like I was being talked down to, but I just didn't really care. And the thing that was like the cherry on top that made me not care is how bad the insta-love was in this book. Like, I know this is inspired by Studio Ghibli, and you can argue the Studio Ghibli movies have insta-love, but guess what? They're all fucking 90 minutes. Versus, this book is 300-something pages, so it's gonna be like a 13-hour audiobook. You have time to build up the relationship between these two, and this author didn't freaking feel like it. I understand the reader that this book is for, and that reader is not me. I'm giving this another flat 3. I do think this is more successful in what it is going for than Hot Wax was, but I had more fun with Hot Wax than I had with this. This one, I was constantly rolling my eyes. Then again, for that vlog, I read We Love You, Bunny by Mona Awad. This is a prequel to my favorite book of all time, Bunny. I was really nervous going into this book. I did not want Bunny to have a continuation, so I requested an arc so I could form my own opinions about it. I have really enjoyed all of Mona Awad's previous novels. In Bunny, Samantha is a creative writing MFA student, and her entire class is comprised of her and these 4 other women who are all rich and pretty, and they're all obsessed with each other. They're bound at the hip, and they call each other Bunny. Samantha loves to make fun of them, but she's also kind of fixated on them, and she's also having problems being able to write her own stuff. One day, the Bunnies invite her to their smut salon for them to share their work, and things spiral from there. It's very dreamlike. And We Love You, Bunny takes place a couple years after Bunny, where Samantha has written a book about her experience at school. And it is the book that we know as Bunny. So this turns Bunny into metafiction. And the Bunnies have kidnapped her and taken her to the attic so that they can tell their side of the story. It takes over 100 pages for this book to show the reason why it exists. So I do think if you're not super into the beginning of this book, but you still have hope for it, you should try to continue, because I think it becomes obvious when you get to a part you're like, oh, that's why this book exists. I was skeptical going into it, and that was a good payoff of, okay, this is what this book is going to be doing differently than Bunny. This is how the focus is different, and this is why the focus is so intrinsically tied to Bunny. To me, this feels separate enough from the story of Bunny. It doesn't tamper with anything that happens in the original, so I felt safe in reading this book. There's a couple qualms that I have with this book. The chapters that are just like them in the attic talking to her are written entirely in monologue. I think they are written poorly. They didn't have to be written that way. It's like, oh, Bunny, I guess you can't talk because you've got a gag in your mouth. Like, duh, she knows there's a gag in your mouth. You don't have to say that out loud. It just feels very stilted and like she did not have to do that. There was no reason. I think there is some explaining away as to why characters would still act the way that they do in Bunny given the events in here. I think those reasons are kind of poor. It does require you to suspend your disbelief. I'll say it's probably a little bit long. Bunny is not even 300 pages and this is almost 500 pages, but I think that this book does a really good job of expanding upon the themes of Bunny specifically when it comes to creative writing, and then when it comes to the speculative element and how we are evolving the speculative element so that we can talk about new things. And the thing that this is mostly talking about is what happens when your creative work goes out into the world and it's no longer yours. I thought that this was worth a read. If you think that it could ruin your experience of Bunny, you don't have to read this, and I'm not going to push you to do something you don't want to do. However, if there's something more that you wanted from Bunny, read it. This is being called Frankenstein meets Heathers, and I think that there could not possibly be a more apt descriptor of this book specifically. And I think that it pairs well with Bunny, even though Bunny is one of my favorite books of all time. This is good to me. So I'm giving this a 4.25. I had a good time. And honestly, I have seen people who expected to love this book absolutely hate it, and people who expected to hate this book enjoy it. So it is a free-for-all who's going to enjoy this, so read this with discretion, I guess. Then I listened to Carl's Doomsday Scenario by Matt Dinniman. This is the second book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, which I started earlier this year. So yes, that is a first for me this year. Another weird thing that I did this month is double up on a series within a year. Considering how many series I'm in the middle of, maybe that wasn't a super responsible decision, but I wanted to, and it was for the Buzzwordathon. The Dungeon Crawler Carl series is a lit RPG sci-fi fantasy series. It's many, many books long. It is about our main character Carl and his ex-girlfriend's cat, Princess Donut. And they happen to be some of the sole survivors of an instantaneous alien takeover of Earth, where they have created these dungeon floors underneath the Earth's surface that in order for humanity to somehow take Earth back, people are going to have to go through all of the different floors of the dungeons, which feel like dungeon crawls in D&D, go through all of those floors and beat the final floor. And all of this is going to be televised across the galaxy. I like to pitch this series of if The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and The Hunger Games had a baby. It has the cutthroat nature and the violence of The Hunger Games, while we're also like the main characters are like pawns in this much larger scheme that they aren't fully informed about, while also being ridiculous and hilarious. I love Princess Donut. I love the humor here. I do think that as a singular installment that this book was weaker than book one, which makes sense because it is shorter than book one. I believe this is the shortest in the series because book one takes place over floors 1 and 2, and from there on out the entire series is going to be 1 floor a book. So this is only level 3 and each of the levels gets harder, so this is going to be the smallest book. It felt more filler than the other book. Everything really felt important. I'm going to anticipate that the next books in the series are going to be better than this one. This felt like a subplot. It felt like a smaller piece than what I was used to with book one. So I'm looking forward to the other books in the series, improving on this. This is a flat 4 for me. I had a very good time. There were times that I laughed out loud. There were times that I gasped. I just really enjoyed the series a lot. So 100% continuing. Then I read the most popular fantasy book of 2025, and that is Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V. Schwab. This is the last book that I read for that recent vlog. This is a book that has been pitched as toxic lesbian vampires, and it takes place from the point of view of 3 different women. There is a woman who starts out in the 1500s in Spain, there's a woman who starts out in the 1800s in England, and in 2019 we have Alice, and she is starting her freshman year at Harvard. We start out before they are vampires and we see them turn and what happens with their life from there. This is a slow, character-driven book that it's not immediately apparent how everything is going to come together, but I do think it comes together into one whole. This is not a plot-heavy book. It is more about seeing how the characters change and how each of the different characters reacts differently to the same sort of things. And I think that this does such a good job talking about power and power dynamics, how different people take advantage of others and how some people shirk that, trying to break cycles of violence and abuse and trauma, while also having a very capital R romantic setting. It's very gothic. It has a dark tone. One of the things that was pitched to me about this book is that it has a lot of yearning, and I think what this does well is show yearning for something that is bad for you or that you can't have or that doesn't actually exist. While the characters themselves may be experiencing yearning, you as the outside force are like, oh, actually, that's not going to be good for you. One of our main characters we see a lot of, one of the main characters we kind of don't see from until the second half of the book, and one of them is the frame narrative through which we get the conclusion of the book. To me, our frame narrative character simply was not as developed as our others were, even though we saw her throughout the entire book, and there was a character who we didn't really see until toward the end. It started out as the perspective I was most interested in because we were getting her backstory, but I thought that her backstory didn't really connect to the rest of the book. They felt like very good short stories. So I really enjoyed this one. I think that this is getting appropriately hyped, that there are people who are really going to love this and people who aren't. This is going to get the attention that Addie LaRue has, but I do not think that this has the widespread appeal that it has. Addie LaRue is short, snappy, and it's magical realism, and while this also deals with immortal girls, kind of like We Love You, Bunny, it's not 100% immediately apparent what this book is going for, but once you get to the end, it does feel very satisfying. So this is another, I think it's a 4.25 for me. It could go up to a 4.5, honestly. I really enjoyed my time with this, and I got exactly what I wanted out of this book. Then I read Educated by Tara Westover. This is a nonfiction memoir that is about Tara as she is growing up, almost a cult that is comprised of just her family. She grew up without a traditional education, and she ended up graduating from BYU and then getting fellowships and going to Cambridge, and I think she went to Harvard afterwards. It is about mostly her journey of recognizing the abuse that her family did to her, and the way that she climbed out of that was by getting an education. I don't know what I thought this book was when it has been one of the most popular nonfiction books in the last several years. I think what I thought about this book was that it was going to be like an, oh, you don't need to have a traditional education to be successful, almost like self-helpy type thing. That's not it at all. The whole point of this book is Tara's being like, because I was not given an education, my entire view of the world was different and I wasn't able to stand up for myself, and having an education was so important to her. The book that I would most tie this to is if you I'm Glad My Mom Died, and you got something out of seeing a realistic depiction of a young person discovering the way that they have been treated is poorly their whole lives. This is very similar, except for the danger that Tara was in was often physical, literal, lethal danger. Her family did not believe in science at all. It was considered the highest treason to go to the hospital. They didn't believe in seatbelts. They didn't believe in safety when their father was in construction. And they had a little construction business in which he consistently put his children in lethal danger. There are times where multiple of the children almost died. The father almost dies at one point. And this family sees all of the terrible things that have happened to them that they have gotten over. Rather than being negligence on their part, they think it is a sign from God that they are the chosen people. Her father is possibly schizophrenic and over time has more radical beliefs that even the church does not line up with. it completely twists his children's view of themselves. And like, she can even see her mother, how her mother just kind of stoops further and further over the course of her life. I thought that this was a very passionately written memoir. Every single scene feels important, and it shows how hard it is to be able to dig yourself out of those situations. I have hardly ever been so angry at a book as when I hear about these children constantly being put in danger, how these parents keep making these same mistakes over and over again, and they think it's not a problem because they don't actually care about their fucking kids. Like, the number of times that CPS needed to be called on them and nothing happens because they isolate themselves from everyone else, so there isn't a community looking after these children. And even like the grandparents don't really do enough to be able to stop this from happening. It's harrowing, and I think it's so important to show how seeing real history and knowledge of science is so important. And it felt like a really poignant time to be reading this book, as the current administration in the country that I'm in is trying to erase important medical knowledge, scientific knowledge, and historical knowledge from everything because it doesn't agree with what they believe. I thought this book was excellent. This is definitely going to be one of my favorite nonfiction of the year. I don't like rating nonfiction when it comes to this because like I don't read enough of it to be like, this is a 5-star, but this really did do a lot for me. So it does feel like it would be up in the 4s and 5s. This is the last book for my 12 Friends, 12 Books, 12 Months challenge, which is 12 of my friends in real life and online gave me a book that they really wanted me to read. This is my real life friend Ashwin's favorite memoir, that he thought that this is exactly what a memoir should be. And I am so glad that he pushed me to read this because I had a total misperception of what this book was, and I'm glad that I read it. Then I read The Faithless by C.L. Clarke. This is the second book in the Magic of the Lost series, which starts with The Unbroken. I read the first book 2 years ago, and I quite enjoyed it, and I just hadn't gotten around to it till now, and having this series project that I'm doing right now is really helping me get around to some of these sequels. So if you're not caught up on my series progress, you should be watching my reels. This series is heavily, like not at all subtly inspired by France's colonization of Africa. But our main character, Terrain, was born in one of these colonized countries, and she was taken by this French-like empire and is sent into the military since she was a child. She is a very, very powerful soldier, and at the beginning of book 1, she and her, battalion get sent to try to quell some rebellions that are happening in her home country. And then we have the other main character, Luca. So she is going to be the queen of this France country. She has not come of age yet, and so her uncle is the regent. She is going to be going to Africa, to the same place where Terrain is, because she is also trying to quell these rebellions. Then at the beginning of the book, Terrain is unjustly court-martialed, and she goes in front of Luca, and the two of them kind of strike an alliance as Luca is wanting her help to quell the rebellion. But as the book goes on, not only are the two of them extremely attracted to each other, Terrain is finding more out about her country and how there is actually magic there, and how her people have been treated, and how she has been used as a vessel or a weapon to create more of the problem. The second book follows where the first book left off. I surprised myself with how much I remembered of book 1. I think it is so interesting to see how the political aspects of this series apply to real life. Obviously, they are not subtle about the different aspects of the politics and how there are different factions who are trying to do different things. The rhetoric that is used by the Empire is real life rhetoric. And I think that the emotions that these characters are feeling are so strong, as we are seeing Luca trying to be a good leader, as she has finally come to see the oppression that her people have done, and she is trying to somehow manipulate the field so that she can continue to have her power, so that she can use her power for good. But there's also the questions of how is what she is doing actually going to help the people that she's trying to help? I think the characters here are very complicated. Nobody is ever simply one thing, and nobody makes the right decision all the time. I do think that this book has less action than the first book is. This book is more court politics, and I think the next book is going to be back to what the first book felt like, but that did not take away from my enjoyment of this, and even though I was away from the series for a while, I still got a lot out of the second book, and I'm really excited to read book 3. I'm so glad that I didn't just write this series off because it had been so long. So I absolutely recommend this series. It is not being read enough. It's super underrated, so go check this out. I think I'm giving this a 4. Then I read James by Percival Everett. I actually have a signed copy. Let's see the signature, everyone. Ta-da! This won the Pulitzer and the National Book Award last year, and ever since I found out that this is about Huck Finn, I was like, no, I absolutely have to read this. I have read Percival Everett earlier this year. I thought it was good, but I thought that the structure of that book wasn't particularly for me, and I was really excited to see this plot. I would have read this if this was an author I had read from before or not. And this is about James, who you might better know as Jim from Huck Finn. It is entirely from his perspective, taking place over the course of Huck Finn, as he has a wife and child, and he finds out at the beginning of this book that his family could be separated, so he runs away, hoping to find a way to save his family. Meanwhile, we have young Huck Finn who comes along with him, and James keeps getting put in these extremely difficult, terrible situations because he is a black man. This book is showing an entirely different side of the story. It's giving a perspective that Mark Twain could not have had. And I liked in the interview that I watched with Percival Everett how he was talking about how he wanted to be in conversation with Mark Twain, and I think that this did that well. This book felt effortless to me, even though I know how much effort it went into this. Possibly my favorite element of this book is the fact that the way that the black people and the enslaved people talk is a dialect that they put on in front of white people as a way to protect themselves, that they are actually more educated than they let on, and they are trying to stay under the radar as much as they can, and that is utilized throughout the book. Language and knowledge is that huge leverage point for them. James as a character felt so fully fleshed out to me. I really enjoyed his journey. I liked how much of Huck Finn this had. The beginning of the book starts out beat for beat, and then as the book moves along, the focus shifts entirely to James, away from the original plot, and there are a lot of plot differences when we come to the end. So some people aren't going to like that. You need to know that there are going to be plot differences. But honestly, the end of Huck Finn is known as one of the worst ending to a famous book, so who really cares? I think that this has so many fantastic discussions. I don't even think I've prepared myself enough to talk about the different discussions that this book has, but like, I did not want to put it down. I was immediately underlining stuff. How strange a world, how strange an existence, that one's equal must argue for one's equality, that one's equal must hold a station that allows airing of that argument, that one cannot make that argument for oneself, that the premises of said argument must be vetted by those equals who do not agree. Like, this book is so good. To me, the big theme of this book is how different reality is for Black America and white America. I feel like I could pick this book apart and just talk about different elements of the chapters endlessly, and it made me want to reread Huck Finn, which I think I was not as big of a fan of when I read as a teenager, because I was critical of what the author wasn't doing. Maybe I took it for granted, but I really love what Percival Everett did. And the last thing I'll say about this is this also has the humor of Mark Twain in it. Like, as the book goes on, it gets more serious, but there are silly things that happen. There are lines that are like deprecating or whatever, but I was actually laughing at some of the lines in here. So I think that this did exactly what it set out to do, and I'm so glad it won like every award. The next book that I read was Falling by T.J. Newman. This is a short thriller, and it is about a pilot who is being blackmailed to crash a plane or his family will die. So there is a man who has taken his family hostage, who is communicating with him while he's flying the plane, saying, hey, you are not allowed to tell anyone. You need to crash this plane when and how I tell you to, or if not, your family's going to die. We are having all of the different players around trying to move like chess pieces on a board so that everyone on the plane is going to be okay. This had a lot of tense moments to it. It definitely had a good pace to it. I didn't have a problem getting through it. There were definitely moments that I felt like I had to suspend my disbelief, and some things that I didn't necessarily felt like that I was fully picturing correctly. There were like people who would be mad at a certain character and I would be like, why are you mad at them? This is a popcorn thriller to me. While like the stakes of this book are really high, it feels like a disaster movie, which isn't something that I typically like to watch, so I don't know 100% why I thought this was going to be 100% for me. I was interested in this because it takes place on a plane. I have a degree in aerospace engineering, so I thought it would be fun. Like, as far as like the high stakes, people are gonna die thrillers, it was fun. I do think it leaves a weird taste in my mouth that this book was written and set in post 9/11 America, and like it doesn't differ enough from 9/11 to me. I don't think it's a spoiler to say the people who are hijacking this plane are Middle Eastern and are wanting to take out the violence that have been done against them on the American public. I feel like this author could have been more creative in trying to come up with something slightly different and wouldn't be considered offensive, considering how much hatred has gone towards people who are Middle Eastern in America because of the acts of those who did 9/11. I don't think I'm ever going to think about this book again. I'm gonna give it a 3. Then I read Rose House by Arkady Martine. This is the last new to me book that I read this month. This is a sci-fi horror novella that was sent to me by Tor.com, so thank you so much for the finished copy. This was originally indie published and has now since been traditionally published earlier this year. This takes place like hundreds of years in the future. There is a famous architect who made not just a smart house, but like a fully integrated AI house. Once that guy died, nobody was allowed into that house, like by the AI, except for his protege could go in there one time a year. And the police have been notified that there has been a dead body found in the house. How did that person get in there? Why is the AI like only alerting them at this time? The character who is allowed to get into the house wasn't even in the country when the death happened, so how did this happen? Look, for a book that tells you that it's like about this cool architecture, like I would have thought that there would have been more descriptors of what it looked like. Have you ever had that reading experience where you read a page and then you go on to the next page and then you realize you didn't read a single thing that happened on the previous page? Or like you're reading a sentence and like you just can't scan it. Like no matter how many times your eyes go over that sentence, it just doesn't go into your brain. That was my entire experience with this book. I have really loved the Tixcalan series by Arkady Martine. I think those books are great. Absolutely recommend them, particularly the first one. I could not have told you that this was the same author at all. I didn't really get the writing style. I didn't care for any of the characters, and I don't understand why this book was being told from multiple perspectives when it's not even 100 pages long. Yeah, it's just over 100 pages long and we're getting multiple perspectives, like, and the font is freaking huge. Like, I don't have time to care about what's going on. There was like one answer that we got about the sci-fi horror element, or like the whodunit, that I don't understand why the author didn't try to take the time to answer the other questions. I don't think this was built out enough. I think this was all about vibes and a couple of ideas that were strung together. This just did not work for me. There was no element of this that I liked. I liked one of the answers that we had, but it didn't make up for the fact that there are a lot of other things that were not expanded upon enough for me. In order for this book to have been successful, I think it needed to be much longer. This was not for me, and I wouldn't really be recommending it. And lastly, there were the 2 books that I reread this month. I did reread Pride and Prejudice for the first time since I was in 7th grade. I consider this to be one of my 2 favorite books in the world. I have watched the 2 main adaptations of this over and over again to no end. I actually watched the Lizzie Bennet diaries alongside it when I was reading it the first time, and I have reread bits and pieces of it before, but I've never actually sat down and read it in its entirety until now. And it was such an eye-opening experience because you don't realize how much is added or taken away by the adaptations until you return to the text. Some things that surprised me: how much implicit dialogue Jane Austen uses, particularly at the beginning of the book. That definitely is a little bit harder for a modern reader to get into because it feels like showing instead of telling. I didn't realize how early we as the reader know that Darcy is into Elizabeth. I didn't remember like all of the stuff at the end where they have serious conversations about their relationship when both of the adaptations end really abruptly after the proposal and the dad's permission. And I just really loved returning to Jane's actual words herself. I have now read all of Jane Austen's finished books except for Persuasion, and Pride and Prejudice and Emma to me are so so special that I really cannot get enough of the story, and I could hear it again and again and again. And the last book I read this month was The Will of the Many by James Islington. This was my favorite book of last year, and the next book in the series is going to be coming out on November 11th. It's called The Strength of the Few. I am so looking forward to it. It's going to be so good. I've heard only brilliant early reviews. Even though this was my favorite book of last year, I low-key forgot a lot of what happened, and I knew for a fact if I wanted the second book to be as good as the first book, I needed to reread it. And I'm so glad that I did, because I was right. There was a ton that I forgot, and there was a lot of things that you could pick up on a second reading that made things a little bit more clear, a little bit more obvious, and a lot of things to look for in the next book. And I just also had a really good time. In a year where I've struggled to find 5-star reads, it was really cool to reread 2 books that I have previously loved and be like, yeah, no, I'm right. These are 5-star books. As I alluded to earlier, I will be making some Will of the Many content coming up that is designed for people who have read the book. So read the book before my content comes out. You have less than a month, please go read it. So anyways, those are all the books that I read in September. I keep wanting to say October. Look at all of them. They actually, if you remove Pride and Prejudice, they actually look pretty nice together because they're all dark. But please let me know what you read in September. I'd love to know. Was there anything you would recommend me? What are your thoughts on any of these books? And if you don't have anything to say, why not leave me a bunny emoji to let me know that you're here? But thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to find me anywhere, you can find me at the links in the description. If you want to watch more of my videos, you can subscribe and hit the bell if you want to know when I release a new video. And as always, I will see you in the next one.